Awesome. So, hello everyone. I'm Jax, and I'm the principal at the Institute for Jedi Realist Studies. And I've been on this Jedi path for about 18 years, which is slightly shocking to say. And I know quite a few other people here are probably shocked all the time when they look at how long they've been doing this. Over those years, there have been a lot of twists and turns. And certainly, if you'd asked me even 15 years ago where I would be now, I would have no clue. And I definitely, looking back on it, am still just kind of amazed at the directions it's taken, but it's been really interesting. So this workshop is a result of my most recent kind of twist and turn in my path, which was a very unexpected one, but hopefully it will lead to some insights for you today. And so today I'm going to be talking about my journey as a Jedi becoming a lesbian romance author, and that kickstarting some of the most intense personal growth of my entire adulthood. And now, I doubt anyone on the planet would say, of course, that is completely logical for a Jedi to learn a whole bunch about themselves while writing lesbian romance. But that's the path my life took. And nor am I going to say that at the end of this class, you should be writing lesbian romance, because frankly, very few people here should even attempt that. However, this applies to any type of writing. So it should be, applicable to anything, and if you have any questions kind of as you go, just go ahead and throw them in there, and I'll try to keep everything kind of focused and applicable. So for me, the Jedi path, first and foremost, is one of personal growth. All of the external stuff requires us to do the internal work. So where that becomes tricky is that it's hard to look at the things that we need to most work on, right? It can be painful and difficult and super uncomfortable. And so it's one of those things where you can have mentors who can prompt you. You can have homework assignments that are trying to guide you to find new things. But sometimes you have to get enough distance to be able to really tackle those topics in a different way. And so that's where I found fiction to be truly beneficial. So tonight I'll be sharing my journey, kind of how I stumbled into writing, and then give you examples for how you can use fiction writing to work through the roadblocks in your own training. And note, even though this is focused on fiction, there's no pressure to write fiction, okay? This is the example because this is how it worked for me, but hopefully you can apply this to just different formats as well and come up with your own unique way to continue your Jedi journey. And so if you don't write anything after that, that's cool. Hopefully find something valuable, and maybe it'll be something you can apply to someone else in the future. So before I dive into my story, what I'd like you to do is look over the course of whether it's your life, your Jedi training journey, and think of at least one area where you really get stuck. Like it's the one thing that you're like, man, I thought I'd have figured this out by now. Because I could still point to some. And, after 18 years, you'd think you'd have figured them out? Nope. Lifelong journeys are very much lifelong sometimes. So take a second just to think of it, any of those areas. If it's an emotional issue, if it's a physical issue, if it's just focus or whatever. Kind of pick something and just keep it in the back of your mind. And you don't need to share it right now. It's just going to be something to allow you to kind of connect to things a little bit. And then as you're thinking about that, I'm also curious if anyone participating today has already written creatively, like whether you write poetry or you write songs, short stories, fan fiction, kind of anything. You can just say yes, no, whatever. If you want to say what you write, that's cool. So I'm just kind of curious. Nice. Getting lots of yeses. Very cool. So hopefully this will give you guys some ideas to kind of convert some other Jedi, right, into being writers and kind of see where it leads. All right, so for me personally, I fully believe that my journey to writing was guided by the Force. And I'm going to define that for you, that what I define the Force as is a universal consciousness. However, it is not one that tells me what to do. It is simply aligning events to meet my own soul's goals in life. So I'm going to talk about it as the Force is helping me by providing me spirit guides and inspiration and just whatever I need, whether it's a dream or, whatever, it's kind of facilitating it. I view it as a co-creation. So what's interesting, though, is before 2018, I would not say that I'm creative. I would occasionally write maybe some poetry, or, I wrote a story as a teenager, but if you asked me, I was like, I'm not creative. If you made me do an assignment in school, I'd be like, I don't know what to do with this. I don't know how to follow these instructions and stuff. So I never considered myself creative. I considered myself adequate to occasionally write some things down. Plus, when I looked at the people around me who I saw as creative, those people that just, ideas flow, and you're just like, where did you come up with that idea? That wasn't me. So I never, if you define creativity in a narrow form, it's very easy to not fit that. That was my story until around 2018. And what's interesting is when I was thinking back on this for this class, when I was a lot younger Jedi, there were actually some people in the Jedi community that assigned almost like fan fiction and writing for their students. And even looking at that type of assignment pretty much terrified me at the time. I was like, there's no possible way I could do that. It's pointless to even try, and it's possible that it would have been fine with the right instruction, but it's also very possible it would have been kind of harmful to my path at the time, because it would have added to this idea of being a failure at something that someone deemed important. So back then, I couldn't have guessed why I struggled to be creative and to write. But as part of my writing journey, it's helped me understand that I'm autistic and I have ADHD, and that means my brain works very differently from the average person, which also means that the average approach to teaching creativity, or just even calling something creative, doesn't work for my brain. So it's very possible that it would have made me, actually put me farther behind on my path rather than moved it forward at the time. And now, many years later, I'm now a proponent of the same thing, but with some different caveats. So it's kind of interesting how it all comes around. So I would say, even though pretty much everyone here said they write something, I'm curious though, do you consider yourself a creative person? So if you can answer that in the chat, because it is a slight difference. Like I said, I wrote some things. I did not consider myself creative. Seriously, Connor? You only recently considered yourself a creative person? Well, I would have called you creative much longer than that. But yes, we will definitely discuss it later. For people who don't know, Connor and I have known each other for 16 years, and so, yeah. So, and I would agree with that, Allie. Like, your graphics are definitely way better than I could do, and I think it's awesome that you've discovered Canva and you've started to kind of create, work in that side of your creativity. So that's very, very cool. And it's definitely something I can't do. And I say that knowing that I don't expect that to ever change. I think that's a brain wiring issue for me. I can get a little bit better, but I don't think I'll ever be, awesome at it. So, yeah, and definitely, creativity, this is focused on kind of writing creatively, but there's so many forms of creativity. It definitely helps to open up that space and that definition, because everyone truly has a creative aspect to them, and the more they work on it, the more it can open up. It just might not look the way they expect it to. So, awesome. Thanks. Yes, journal entries are super critical. And I'll actually address that at the end. All right, so that was actually really interesting. I learned some things about my own friends. It's awesome. So cool. So my story is like, how do I go from not creative to writing my first novel in 2018? And I will say at the time of this recording, so this is June of 2020, I have 4 books published. The 5th one is in edits. I have multiple ones in progress, and I'm in a program that is a veteran screenwriting program. So I have more stories than I know how to juggle right now. And yet, there's still a part of me that goes, well, someday I will not have stories to tell, and then what do I do? So there's always a little part of kind of my brain that goes, yeah, this could all stop tomorrow, which is weird because it hasn't stopped since it started. So how did it start? So I would say actually at the end of 2017, I was struggling with the direction that the United States was heading, and in order to escape, I'd finally discovered the lesbian romance genre, and that allowed me to escape into a world that I didn't live normally, and so it really just, it gave me like, it allowed me to reclaim like a sense of kind of sanity, really, and so I read a ton. I mean, I read like 20 books a month. It was a lot. And I found a group of people that had a Slack channel that was geared towards lesbian romance, and a lot of them were independent authors. And I had no idea about writing, really, but I know I liked learning about things and learning about writing, so I would just kind of peek in on the discussions as people would ask about publishing or writing or just anything, but still I didn't have a single thought of writing a story. But then one day I woke up and I had a dream in my head, and back in the day that wouldn't have been so rare, but I had a kid 5 years ago, and since having her, I really have very few dreams, because sleep is a weird thing with a kid around. So having a dream is novel in itself, but this dream, as short as it was, stuck with me. And so the dream was super simple. I mean, super short. It was like a version of me going back to college, and I walk into a room, and there's my high school band teacher, and I had this overwhelming sense of like coming home. And I was like, interesting. Basically, it just kept bringing up questions at that point. I was like, okay, why would this even happen? Like, what, beyond, like, from the dream interpretation standpoint, I kind of looked at it and said, I think this just means I need to spend some time rediscovering music and spending more time with that. But then beyond that, because I'd been reading so much, I was like, that's an interesting premise for a story. What would cause that? And so I started asking questions over the next like 2-3 days. It's like, okay, well, what would cause a person at 39 years old to leave their life and start over? And what creates that sense of home for a person? And so it wasn't exactly me asking how I would do that, though it was kind of, since it's similar to me, right? It was just kind of like playing what-if games. And over the course of those next couple days, just little ideas started settling out of all the fog. And at that point, it was like, okay, well, why don't I just play with this? And I just started kind of writing some stuff down. But I needed to kind of figure out that backstory, right? And so that first lesson, really, in these first couple months, all revolved around listening to my intuition. Because my intuition is what helped me differentiate the question and answer, right? Because you ask a question, there are infinite ways for a person to say, I'm going to go back to college. And so you have to kind of like listen to your gut and say, but this path is more interesting. And maybe there's 2 or 3, but those are the more interesting ones. And then you keep asking questions. And so that was the first thing that I started noticing, is my intuition was telling me things. And even though I'm a person that walks my life very intuitively, I struggle trusting it. Like, I'm constantly like, oh, is that really real, or is that just what I want to think and what I want to believe? And so trusting intuition has been a challenge in my life. And so, but what was cool is in a book, you can't get things very wrong. I mean, like, in real life, if you're wrong about your intuition, it could be catastrophic. Not most of the time, but that's what my brain does, right? It catastrophizes. But in a book, the worst thing that can happen is you have to delete something. And now, granted, it has a kind of catastrophic term for it, kill your darlings or kill your babies, but you're still just deleting. And really, you don't even have to truly delete it. You can put it in another document that's your saved little darlings that you don't want to truly kill, but that don't belong in a book. So it's like such a low-stakes practice for learning to listen to your intuition. So that was my first lesson in writing fiction, and it was incredibly valuable. And so what I'd like to know is, in the chat real quick, if you can also say kind of like, yes, I struggle with my intuition, or actually, no, I'm awesome. And then if that's true, you are awesome, and your path is probably going to be a little bit smoother because of it. Because I know struggling with it has been a struggle. Yeah. Both, yeah. You know, it's funny when those moments where there's no doubt, it feels so good, and then I usually let my brain run, and then eventually some doubts will come in, but I can usually silence it, and it definitely is getting easier lately, so it's pretty cool. So, yeah, second guessing is tricky, and slightly off topic. What's been helping me lately is I took a different class from someone and learned to use a pendulum. And I use that as kind of like a double check. So there are definitely other tools that you can use to increase that connection to your intuition, and pendulums are one of them. They also do require that you trust them. So, you know, that might be a circular reasoning issue, but yeah, awesome. Yes, I love synchronicity too, Connor. So yes, pendulums are wonderful, cool tools. All right, awesome. So, for me and writing fiction, writing intuitively comes in a couple forms, and hopefully this will be super helpful for those of you that are already writing. So, you know, when you're writing, even with a poem, right, like there are infinite number of words you can choose from, all of which will impact what comes after them, which is why I pretty much write in order, because every choice impacts the next. And so you can be writing, and you can even love what you're writing, and then you just realize that you're in a corner and you have nowhere to go. And sometimes for me that literally feels like a wall. Like I can just feel it, like I'm just right here going, oh, dang, I screwed that up somewhere. And then I walk it back and try to go back and say, okay, where was it working? Like what still works here? And then I can go, okay. And physically what I do, in case this helps, is I will go to that wherever I feel like it was still good, and then I put a whole bunch of returns in there, so there's a bunch of white space, and I just start writing new. And then sometimes I find I only needed like an extra paragraph or two, and I can actually like kind of meld it back together. Sometimes the stuff after has to be scrapped. Either way, I find as long as I'm listening to my intuition, I don't get stuck for long. And so writer's block hasn't been a thing for me. And even if it does still feel stuck, like I've maybe figured out where I screwed it up, but I don't really know where I want to go with it, sometimes as simple as asking the question or just explaining to someone, this is where I'm at, I feel stuck, and then sometimes the answer comes that immediately. They don't even have to say anything. Sometimes it does take them asking questions, but brainstorming and having someone else's questions come up allows me to keep going again. And so, like I said, I've written almost every single day for the past 2+ years. And none, you know, it was pretty rare if I took some time off. So it's just relatively straightforward when I'm listening to my intuition. It doesn't mean it's easy. It doesn't mean I'm writing a lot of words, but I'm getting ideas going forward. So yeah, that's what's really kept me from having writer's block, which is pretty handy. And another way that it comes up is there are times when a scene is really hard to write. At first, those were usually physically intimate scenes, and I will be honest, I totally cheated, and I would slam an alcoholic beverage that would take away my own internalized, like, puritanical ideas, and I could write again. I don't have to do that anymore. I just have a lot of practice at it now. But there are still times when a scene is just really hard to write, which is different than just I'm embarrassed to write it, or, I don't know, weird ideas are coming in. And I can usually step back now and say it's usually one of two things. One, the scene is totally wrong, or two, it's just not the right time to be writing it. Sometimes I want to plan ahead and say, oh, I'm going to write this book next. And then I finish up what I'm doing, and then I get there and I go, this book is not talking to me. But this other book, it's screaming at me. And so I've learned as long as I follow that intuition and don't try to force what's happening, you know, just because I decided it should be that, the writing's a lot smoother. It comes more easily. It's a lot more fun. Forcing it is rarely necessary. And sometimes it's just that the scene sucks. It doesn't belong there, and you just cut it and keep going. Like it's like you're trying to tell them how they ate cereal or something. You know, like no one needs to read that unless it's super interesting. So those are the main examples I have of writing with intuition. And I would say if that's all I learned from writing fiction, I would still recommend it highly to people, because where else can you get low-stakes intuition practice? It's not very common. So, does anyone have any questions about that? You know, I'm keeping an eye on the chat, but just giving you a half a second to answer. All right, cool. So, now, here's the thing, though. When I sat down to write, I didn't know how to write. I mean, I know what school taught me to write, which was almost nothing to begin with, but I really didn't know what I was doing. I knew how to write a sentence, I knew how to write paragraphs, you know, that sort of thing, but I knew I couldn't outline, I couldn't plan ahead, I didn't know what I was doing, and even the books that teach you how to create characters and story arcs were just, my brain doesn't work that way. I have to just kind of do it in order, even though I have a few key points maybe that I'm aiming for. So that meant I had to find my own way in life, or in, you know, in writing and in life. So, sorry, I kind of lost my place. So here's the thing. School teaches us how to write in a certain way, and it's a complete and utter lie. Some people do it. Some people outline very, very well. Some of my favorite writers do not outline at all, and we are a lovely bunch called pantsers. We write by the seat of our pants. There's also a nicer term called discovery writers, but really I feel like pantser is a badge of honor. We write, we follow our intuition, and we just see where it takes us, and then we fix it all. So basically, all the rules you may have been taught in school or wherever, toss them out. You don't need them, at least right now. Now, there are rules that are important, like grammar and punctuation if you're going to publish, but if you're not, don't even worry about it. I don't care if you wrote a sentence with 300 words in it. If it's helping you, just do it. So, and yeah, Jason, that totally makes sense. Like, having the first few scenes in the climax is totally, that's how a lot of people end up writing. Just having, it's like you just need a few benchmarks, and then you see how you get there. And it's just as fascinating for the writer in that case as it is for the reader, hopefully. So here is how I found my solution. So since I didn't know what I was doing, my solution in my first book was to create a main character that was very much like myself, so that I didn't have to try to get into someone else's head. I just had to modify my own. So that meant that I wrote an autistic butch lesbian who was struggling to navigate a neurotypical world, but who was also, like, gotten to the point of being fairly comfortable with herself and fairly comfortable with, you know, explaining that to people. Like, hi, I'm having a weird day. My autism is being really present today, you know, and stuff like that. Like, that's kind of where my character was at, was the same place I was, because I could understand that. So that was step one. Step two, however, was to figure out why she was going back to college at 39, right? We still need a backstory. It's kind of critical. So looking at my own life, I was like, well, there would be two options. So for people who don't know, I've been with the same woman for 20 plus years now. Obviously, we have a kid, I mentioned that, but she has some really major health issues. So she very easily could die at any moment. I mean, she's not going to just like drop dead like that, but she has seizures and things like that. So I've faced her mortality for a long time now, and it's a very active fear that has its moments of popping up very intensely, and then other times when it's just, you can almost forget about it. Not for long, but it's a thing, right? And so as I was looking at options, I was like, okay, so if someone was like me, they would get divorced. Well, that didn't sound very healthy to write, or their partner could die. So since the divorce book didn't make sense, I decided to write a book where the partner had died. And I know that seems counterintuitive. Like, what's healthier about writing about death than divorce? Well, one, I mean, I really didn't want to dive into the emotions of divorce. To me, that's introducing some things I don't want to deal with my own relationship, right? So that's where that part comes in. But also, there's another aspect of my journey, and sorry, I'm not sure what is making noises on my computer. So there's another aspect of my journey that really kind of tipped the scales towards Cam, the character, going through this kind of midlife crisis after her partner died. And that's because, so I looked back at my life, and now think about what your thing is, right? That thing that's always just kind of bugged you and you can't quite figure out how to work through it and kind of fix the problem. For me, one of those is death. Like, I suck at not only death, like people dying, but people saying goodbye. And it never made sense. Like, I'm a very independent person. I will easily just, like, be like, oh, I can go somewhere for a couple weeks? That sounds amazing. And then when it comes right down to it, the actual goodbye, I'm, like, all emotional, and it's annoying. So it's been one of those things that I'm like, why can't I figure this out? And to really bring it home for me, there was a woman I met that I only knew for literally a month. We spent 1 month in each other's physical presence, and we only talked once or twice after that. So that's not a very long period of time at all. And then she died like 6.5 years after that. And so when I learned about that, it hit me so hard. I was like, this is weird. And then as time went on, I still could never overcome my grief, which is really weird and super illogical and frustrating. And so I figured, you know what? Maybe through writing Cam's journey of getting through kind of the last parts of her grief and finding new love because it is a romance and kind of discovering new parts of her, maybe I will also figure some stuff out for myself too. Didn't know how I was going to do it, but why not try? So, and really in the end, my intuition said that had to be Cam's backstory. I don't know why. And even now I have readers that say, but why did Sharon have to die? Because she did? I don't know. It was the backstory. You can't always control some of these things. But now I recognize it from my own personal growth standpoint. So basically, I knew that this backstory was not going to be fun, but it would be beneficial. And so I went with it. And so I had a backstory. I had the basics of Cam. And then, geez, don't kill your characters when people love them. That's the big lesson you learn writing fiction. If you kill off the characters that people love, people will be sad. However, you can get away with it in other genres a lot easier than romance. So, all right. So, here's the thing. So, I have a character, basic qualities, I have a backstory. I have an idea kind of where we're starting. But, you know, when you write a book, there are a whole bunch of little bitty details. I'm the type of person that likes to get bogged down in details. Like, oh, well, what should her favorite color be? I don't even, like, that's important. And, like, what car does she drive? And the thing is, though, all those little details, all they did was paralyze me. And I very quickly learned that there's a way to cheat that. And I just cheated and said, oh, her favorite color is my favorite color. Her birthday was my birthday. And actually, to be honest, I did that not because I didn't want to remember it, but because I needed to know her astrological influences. And so that was totally why I did that. And I did fully research the exact birth date for Sharon for her personality to be the best match for Cam's. That's called nerdy research, and I highly recommend that, though, because you learn a lot as well doing that type of research. Just don't spend too many hours or days on it. So, there's unimportant details. People's favorite color rarely has an actual impact on the story, right? But you need them to wear clothing, and so, cool, have them pick a color, you know. So, there were things that I did to minimize the choices that weren't important so I could focus on the actual important part, which is the story. And so, if you're a person that is just like, I'm just trying to learn how to write, then don't worry about those little details. Borrow them, you know, borrow them from you, borrow them from your family. Just keep it simple, okay? And then, basically, I was creating a template for Cam using myself without making Cam me. It's a little weird to do sometimes, but it worked. So, like, Cam plays drums. That way I knew how to relate to her. It was very easy for me to write from that from an educated standpoint without doing any further research. Her favorite songs were my favorite songs. Again, easy. Also, I get to kind of nerd out with people and actually made a playlist, for that book. So I got to share my favorite songs with readers. It makes it fun. And then, like, the part where it gets a little complicated, so Cam's best friend is literally just written based off my best friend. Now, here's the key. My best friend, Sarah, absolutely knew I was doing this. She had input in the book. She got to read it. Like, so it was very much an open thing. I didn't base any other characters on real people. One, because it's complicated, but two, because it just gets weird. But my friend is kind of a character in herself, and so it worked really well. But that's also why that character will never have a spin-off, because that's too weird. So, basically, here's the thing. So, when it comes to borrowing, obviously plagiarism is bad and wrong and not beneficial. But borrowing these little details, using people in your life as a template, that's not plagiarism, right? Just be careful not to tell someone else's story for them. And I walked that line a little bit too closely, and those are some of the early mistakes I made. It was still okay, but just be careful. All right, so that was kind of my template. And then the other trick I used, because I recognized my own limitations. Since I barely knew how to write something like myself, I knew I couldn't write a neurotypical person. And neurotypical meaning a non-autistic person in this case. It can also be applied to other situations. And so I wrote this story completely from Cam's perspective. And that allowed me to really engross people into the autistic experience and totally cheat and not have to really get totally inside the head of a character that I knew it was going to be too difficult to just physically write it. So that was a carefully chosen strategic choice, really. So that was kind of the template I was working from. And so if you're thinking, oh, it'd be cool to be able to write, but I don't really know what to do, borrow. And so, and I'll come down to like some good ways to borrow here in just a little bit. So then I had all the things I needed to start writing, right? So I'm writing, and then I would get to situations, and first I would ask, how would I react? Just to kind of connect to the moment. But then most of the time, I mean, Cam reacts differently than I do. So it's like, first, how would I react? And then what would make sense for Cam to do here? And so that allowed me to relate, kind of dive deep into a moment, but still separate. And so that's also, I feel like, where there's a key aspect there. Like, when you're writing, you're diving into these moments, and you get to learn about yourself, and then you still have to go, okay, but wait, this character either isn't you at all, right? Or maybe they're like a version of you. So try to tweak that a little bit. Just experiment, because it's a very fluid concept. So that's kind of a, and now I would say after multiple books, I'm much better at it. And so like I get farther and farther from characters that are like myself, and it's a little bit easier, but I had to start where I started. There was no other way to do it. So before I dive into what I recommend for people starting, I want to give you a quick summary of the rules, which is there aren't any. You don't have to know what you're doing. You don't have to know what story you want to tell, and you don't have to have an original story. You could just play around with someone else's kind of a story idea. Just please, obviously, don't just rewrite someone else's story. All right, and so I've got a question from Allie. And so, yeah, so she asked, by the time I got done with Cam, was she someone I felt I wanted to be? I always describe Cam as a much cooler version of me. She communicates much more easily than I do, especially with her feelings, and she has, in some ways, more courage about certain things. At the same time, we share a lot of similar challenges and aspects, and so I would say, writing Cam's story is filled with fantasy all over the place, because even as her life is hard, it's still a lot easier sometimes than mine. And she gets to do some really cool stuff that I didn't get to do or don't get to do. But at the same time, I'm pretty happy with who I am. And so it's cool. And it's also interesting when people are like, people tend to relate to one character over another a little more, right? So it's always intriguing when people ask, well, which character do you like more? I'm like, well, Cam is basically me, so, like, that's interesting. But, of course, I wrote her love interest to be utterly fascinating to me, and so, like, they're more interesting to me because I know Cam. Like, they're the interesting ones to me. But it's always interesting when people are like, oh, I totally dig Cam. I'm like, cool. I wonder if you'd even like me. Like, it gets a little weird sometimes, but it's all good. Because she is definitely her own person, her own character, and not me. All right, so getting into an easier place to start. Since I didn't plan on doing anything and I don't exactly have time to just go randomly writing for fun, I didn't go this route, but a lot of writers go the route of starting with fan fiction. Fan fiction has a lot of benefits. One, you have an established world, right? You have characters that you can play with. You've got scenarios. You have their relationships. But you can also break all sorts of rules. If you didn't like that, how something turned out, you can change it. So if you want Obi-Wan to live instead of die, change it and play with it and see what would happen instead. What I think would be a useful place for a lot of people to start is to kind of try writing yourself into the Star Wars universe or another universe if that actually fits you a little bit better. Like, go ahead and you can tweak things, right? Like, if you wish you were taller, make your character taller. There's no harm. Go ahead and make some of those little tweaks. But what you don't want to do is soften the thing that you're struggling with, right? Because that's the whole point of doing the writing. The writing is to help you be able to dive into something, but in a safer format. So maybe you write it where your favorite Jedi is your mentor, and you can write how you would want them to train you. Play around with that. Or create your ideal mentor. Create both of them as characters, There are a lot of ways to kind of play with this. Whatever makes sense to you. Play with it. See what happens. And yeah, definitely, one-line prompts can be really handy, Seamus. I never have time to do writing prompts because I'm always so in the middle of a project. But there's some really great ways to play with writing prompts. And there's some cool, Twitter accounts and things like that. And even there's a Medium account that has Twitter, writing prompts and things, too. And so here's the thing, right? So this works because you're putting distance between yourself and your situation. So just like when someone else is talking to you about their problem and you can always find something that helps or maybe almost always, right? But if you try to look at your own problems, you're like, I don't even know what to do. This is never going to be solved, right? Like, that's because you're too close to it. You can't see it from a distance. So now if you basically are creating your own avatar, putting them in a different scenario, but with the same type of a problem, and now you're writing it for the characters, you've got distance. And you can play around with, okay, well, what if this person did this? Okay, let's see how that works out, and then maybe you'll find that you didn't like that outcome at all. You can go back and you can try something else. You can literally create a choose-your-own-adventure story for your life. So that's where fan fiction can be really helpful. It's giving you the chance to play with topics and things you struggle with in kind of a safer manner and in a way that you don't have to create all the characters, you don't have to create all the details, you don't have to, like, in essence, that's what I did with my story anyway. I did fan fiction of my own life and said, okay, if this person starts like this way, but we tweak it, and then we send them off, what happens? And that worked out really well for me. So, and I would say actually most of my favorite writers started as fan fiction writers. And they actually have even reworked their fan fiction. Like you strip enough of the original work out of it, and it's a standalone, like, great story on its own. So if you wanted to play with that, there are actually ways that you can still turn that into, like, a published book later if you wanted to do that. So there's a lot of options with fan fiction. And so basically, find a way to create that distance. But then even that answer, right, of this being just you're creating distance between yourself and your problem is really a surface answer. Because here's what I've discovered. Nothing that you write is created in a vacuum, right? Like, you're never disconnected from the force. You're never disconnected from inspiration. And so when you're writing, and all of a sudden this new idea, this new solution comes up, it's not that you just pulled that out of thin air. I mean, that can literally be coming from your spirit guides, it can come from your higher self, it can come from your subconscious. There's so many ways that this is coming in. It's you're using writing then as a tool to be more open to these messages that are coming through the force. And I would say just like playing a video game, even if you get to choose, paths and stuff through it, even just reading like a real, choose your own adventure book, it's not the same as literally writing it all out. And so there's a hidden power in writing that, especially if you go into it saying, you know what, I'm going to use this as a tool to be more open to finding some new solutions, you're going to find more of them because you're just more receptive to them. And granted, if that sounds a little too weird, that's okay. You can just think of it as putting distance between yourself. It's still going to work, and you're still going to find yourself coming up with different answers, different solutions. So this is why I say just write and play around with it. So since I've talked for a lot right now, I'd like you to take a moment to think back to the problem that you came up with at the beginning of this workshop. So have you had any flashes of inspiration that, even if it's just a couple words that could be a scenario or something to play with, one, make sure you write those down. Inspiration is slippery as all get out. You can think you're going to remember it, and then it'll be an hour later, and then you're like, oh, what did I think of? Or it could be the next day, or I've actually been falling asleep, had something that popped into my head, and I'm like, I am so close to sleep. But if I don't write it down, I'm going to be so mad at myself. So I get up. I don't even get out of bed. I literally grab my phone. I open up either Google Docs or the notepad, and I just put in enough details to jog my memory, and then I put it away, and then I work on it later. Because, man, it is such a horrible feeling to feel like you had this great inspiration, and it just went right away. That sucks. So don't do that. Write things down. And that includes your dreams. That includes just all that stuff, right? Like, write stuff down. It doesn't have to be in detail. Yes, and you can do the voice memos too. I most of the time don't do that. I don't know why. I think because I don't want to have to go back and listen to it and then type it. I'd rather either try voice to text, which is iffy, or just, get notes down. Just because I hate feeling like I have to go and transcribe something. But not everyone hates it, so do what works for you. If that means keeping a little notebook around and a pen, cool, do that. There's definitely some satisfaction in physically writing something down as well. So, all right, so that's the rule still for the rest of this little workshop. And also, it is the rule for the next few days, at least. Do your best to write down any flashes of inspiration, because you don't know when it's going to hit. All right. Yeah, and definitely, if keeping it short when you're just trying to get details down. I had to do that this morning because I had a really cool dream this morning, and I don't think it would turn into a story, but you never know. That's why it's good to have just documents with little snippets in as well. All right. So back to my story so we can get into something besides just intuition, because there's a lot more. So as I was writing this book, so this is just over the course of a couple months in the summer of 2018. So I noticed that my personal life was like paralleling Cam's, which is weird since I wasn't in the same situation, and yet I kind of was, right? So what happened is at this time I came up with a really cool way for her to work through her grief. It was intense and not the most fun for her, but it worked really well. And if we have time at the end, I can explain what I did, because there might be some people that could take that inspiration just for your own personal growth. So I was doing that, and then there was a post that came up on Facebook, and there was a woman who was looking for volunteers to get their Akashic record read, so that she had just a few more people to practice on before she offered it as a paid service. And I was like, ooh, I've never had my Akashic record read. Now, if you don't know what that is, it's pretty cool. So the concept of the Akashic record is like all of your lives, past, future, everything is in these records. But you can't just show up and read the book. That's like totally cheating. So, but people can learn how to go there and basically ask questions and then give you the information back. It's like an energetic Google. And just as with Google, it's important what questions you ask and how you ask them. So I did my reading, and at first I started with something simple. I was like, why is money so difficult for me? And because it is. It's always been a thing. And honestly, I don't even remember what the answer was, but I have it written down somewhere. And I learned a really cool new grounding meditation, which I need to write that up still for everyone because it's really cool. And then I had a bunch of time left, so I had like 15, 20 minutes left. And I almost couldn't even ask the question, to be honest. It was so difficult to get it out, partly because I just felt so silly. But I had to ask, who was this woman? Like, why can't I just like be a normal human and not grieve someone I barely knew? And the answer, and I'm not going to get into it, partly because I can't really do it without getting emotional, and two, because it is long. But if anyone wants to know, I've got multiple blog posts that kind of detail this process over time. But it all boiled down to, it was a past life like thing where I'd gotten my heart broken, and I apparently never healed that. And so we met in this lifetime long enough to kickstart that healing. So I spent my entire lifetime, and still do now, right, struggling with people dying and people saying goodbye and stuff. For a past life issue I had no idea was even, that I didn't even know that was possible, right? Like, I assumed if you were spiritually aware enough, that shouldn't even bother you. You should be able to just go, cool, we'll just meet again. Guess what? Logic doesn't really care when it comes to trauma. I'd probably say that the other way around. Trauma doesn't care about logic. But when I learned that, it opened up everything. And now that wasn't directly writing related, but if I hadn't been doing the work that I was doing through the writing of this book, I don't think I would have been ready to do that reading. And I don't think I could have handled the answer as well, because it was intense. Like, I went through days of much more intense grieving, but purposefully, to try to get kick-started some healing. And so, you know, like, I had to have that foundation already in place before I could now kickstart this other part of my spiritual growth. So, one, the lesson here is you don't know what's going to come about while you're writing or after. You don't know what you're preparing yourself for, but if you can listen to your intuition, it's going to help you get there. So that part is pretty dang cool. And then since then, honestly, like, these past 2 years have been so intense as far as my growth and journey, and I'm nowhere near the end of it. But I was in a much better place by the end of just writing this first book. And I was like, this is pretty cool. And then I thought, okay, well, I'm not really sure what I'm going to write next, but I had quite a few ideas, because ideas they breed like rabbits, like, seriously. The more you have ideas, the more they're going to show up. So when I finished it, I was like, I think maybe I'm not done with these characters, and so I started diving into Cam and Sharon's origin story, basically, where they meet. And the thing is, so I've now that I'd solved this great mystery of my life, and I knew I was going to be working on it for a while, let's dive into something else so painful. And I was like, all right, I'm going to put these characters during Don't Ask, Don't Tell, being young Marines trying to hide this relationship, and address all of the lingering emotions that I was dealing with. And you are welcome, Karen. I'm glad that helped. Make sure you wrote it down. So, you know, like, because I think I felt like it was safe to do this, to start diving into like one of the most painful time periods of my life, because I knew how well it worked out with the first book. And at the same time, so here's the thing. We have this myth in our society, maybe all societies, that great art has to come with great pain. And that's why our you know, best writers and stuff are all alcoholics and addicts and struggling and stuff. That's all crap, okay? Like, you don't have to make anything more painful. Like, genuinely do not have to make things more painful. When I went and kind of dove into this time period, I was like, okay, I could try to tell my story. It wasn't all that awesome. Or I could tell a happier version of it, right? A completely alternate reality, where the emotions are still there. I'm still telling the truth of that era, but I'm making it better. Like, it's more hopeful. There is a good result. And through this process, I could work through my own stuff, and I could also kind of heal those wounds, because it just it wasn't all bad, right? Like, it almost created like false happy memories. I don't know, but it worked. That's all I'm going to say. So I would say, like, yes, you want to use writing as a way to dive into the stuff that's hard, but you don't have to make it more painful than necessary. That's important, right? Like, you can approach it from the Choose Your Own Adventure book and ask, okay, what's going to be fun to write? What are these fun options? You know, but also at the same time, what will provide the most growth? If you put that intention out there, you're going to find a solution, and because they're not mutually exclusive. You can have fun and still heal. You can have fun, work through the pain, right, and heal. There's a little bit of pain there. It sucks. Buy tissues. You'll be fine. As long as you're not reveling in it and trying to make it infinitely worse. So that's my caveat for this. Make it simpler, you know, make it fun, and it'll be easier to work through this all. Because even going as deep as you can, you're still only hitting layers of an onion. There's still so much more out there for you to explore for yourself. So, and then the other thing is, you know, I mentioned Star Wars fanfic. You can write whatever you want, though, right? Like, pick a different fic, you know, if you want to play with the Avatar world, or you want to play with just your own life, however you want to do it. It's cool. For me, it works really well to work with romance. I don't know why. Probably because my biggest issue is dealing with heartbreak and intimacy and being open. So that works for me. But go with what works for you. If that's even writing horror, that's not going to be something I'm ever going to read. I don't like horror. It creeps me out. But if that's what works for you to work through stuff, cool, go for it. People love it. It's just never going to be my thing. Follow your intuition. Literally the theme. No, Jason, I am not going to collaborate on your horror stuff. So yeah, so that's, one area where writing fiction has helped me. The other thing, though, is in writing, you should be researching. It's just a thing, right? Like, even if you're writing from what you know, do some research. Learn more about what you know. So for me, I was researching autism and finally putting in, like, a good amount of time so that I could write from it, also from an educated standpoint, not just, like, educating myself enough to feel comfortable with the label. So, through that research, I learned about the history and all of the major problems with diagnosis that result in a large number of people not getting properly diagnosed, and maybe ever, or not until their own kids are going through the diagnosis process. All of that left me, one, more educated so I can help educate other people. Two, I could write a better book because I made sure that people were getting the right terminology and, like, the representation on the page was good. And then three, it just helped me in general understand myself better. Another way this showed up is so I've got a series, and then I've got a second series where one of the characters is on the asexual spectrum, and that requires way more research than autism, and it's still something that I'm researching, honestly, but it allowed me to understand myself a lot better. And also through that research process, I had some great conversations with people, so I've made deeper friendships because of it. So all of these are all benefits that wouldn't have really come about because I wouldn't have taken the time. When life is busy, it's hard to justify taking months to study something. But if I'm writing a book, I could justify it all day. As long as I'm still writing, I could justify the research. And it made it a lot easier. And then even more interesting is now, it's still only been a few months. All the autism research resulted in me figuring out that I actually have ADHD and didn't know until now, when I'm 41. That is utterly life-changing and would have been great to know 20 years ago. So you truly don't know what you're going to discover through this process. So I really can't recommend research and writing enough. Since, I don't know what I'm going to learn even in the next year. I definitely can't tell you what you're going to learn, but I can tell you that, one, writing has kept me sane. Two, if you allow it, writing will teach you a lot. And three, it might actually be a better use of your time than, I don't know, sitting on Facebook and getting all rage triggered like I do. So, I'm like, write more, read less. So here are my key takeaways, and these are going to be on the graphic that Allie made. So, one, listen to your intuition. Listen, right? Like, that's just the number one rule of life. Listen to your intuition. The more you do, the better it's going to work out. It will guide your path. You don't have to worry about going the wrong way because you're going to be listening. So that's great. We're constantly getting information from the Force. So keep a dream journal. Just take notes somewhere, anywhere, something. Keep track of it. Keep track of all the notes of inspiration. What that also does is it teaches your brain to pay attention to them, because it says, oh, wait, this isn't just some random thought. This is an important thought, and I need to pay attention and make sure that it's remembered. So that is training yourself to be more open and receptive to inspiration anyway. Two, try fiction writing. Journaling is awesome, and I have another point about that too. I still journal, and it's super critical. Sometimes I have to journal first before I can write. Sometimes I write and have to journal after. It all kind of depends. But, you know, just writing in general is helpful, but play around with writing fiction because there are some, you know, there's another safety net there. You can be a little more out there with the writing too, especially if you're not showing it to anyone, which I wouldn't recommend unless you have someone truly trustworthy, is just keep this to yourself at first. Let yourself really go through the process. So, 3, if the idea of a book or even like a short story sounds intimidating, start with just a journal entry. Pick a topic and then write it in the form of a conversation with your favorite Jedi. It could be a friend, it could be a fictional Jedi, whatever. Don't overthink it, just start putting stuff down. Write the conversation as you think it would happen. I do this sometimes with new stories. I'll start just kind of going, oh, this is kind of happening, this is happening, and all of a sudden dialogue starts like solidifying, and it becomes a conversation. And so I just write it all out. It rarely stays in that form. It is almost always going to be changed because I'm writing something that's too far out in the future, and they're going to make 5 different decisions that completely changes it. But writing it opened up new ideas, and it helped me understand the characters better. And it was just necessary. I mean, heck, if the thought's in my head, it needs to get out anyway, or you want things flowing, right? You want energy to flow. Creativity is energy. Keep it flowing. The more you write, the more it flows. The 4th thing is don't avoid the painful parts of your life, because those are the areas with the greatest potential for growth. But also don't make them more painful than necessary. Play around with it. What could you do to make the situation lighter, funnier, happier? You know, where can you make different choices? There's nothing wrong with taking a kind of a tragic situation and making it a comedy. Now, if that doesn't work for you, don't do it. Like, don't try to force it, okay? It's just everyone's a little bit different, right? So just play around with it. And it doesn't have to be literal. That was the hardest thing for me to learn because my brain is very literal. It took time for me to separate what I experienced from what they are experiencing. Because sometimes I'd be like, oh, what if they did this? Well, that's not what happened. Dude, you're making this up. None of this happened. Okay, now we can clear this stuff out of the way. Write this, and it's fine. So, you know, recognize also where your own brain gets a little idiosyncratic. And then 5, here's the thing. I'm always available. If you are working on some writing stuff and maybe you just want to brainstorm a little bit, or, you know, you just need some tips, or maybe you're thinking about publishing for the first time, since I've walked that path a few times now on the self-publishing side, and I follow a lot of people, especially on Twitter, to kind of know where some of the pitfalls are, things like that. Things change a lot. And so if you just need resources, my recommendations, I've got my favorite craft books. Everyone has their own, but anything at all, my contact information is going to be on the handout. So you can reach out at any time. Basically, you know, someday I will write down I'll organize more of this stuff anyway, and it'll probably be on my author blog site. But yeah, so that's the big thing. Reach out. You can reach out to me or to another writing friend, right? Like, just don't stay isolated and stuck. Reach out. If writing is not getting you unstuck, then you definitely want to brainstorm with someone. So that is the bulk of what I wanted to cover. So if you're willing to share, if you had any flashes of insight, I'm totally interested. And feel free to unmute yourself if you have something to share, or you can just post it in the chat. And then if you any questions, and before we take off, I'll make sure to share a brief kind of list of examples of also what I taught people through my books, because I'm all about teaching, as many people know. And so I made sure to teach readers little snippets here and there of really parts of the Jedi path without them knowing it. I was kind of sneaky. So, any questions? All right, cool. Let me go back a little bit. Trying to argue with my computer real quick to go back to it. Okay. Preferred writing program, I honestly just write in Google Docs. And then when it's time for edits, I then put it into Word because that's what editors want it in. But I don't move it to Word until then because I don't like the interface on the cell phone for Word. That's the thing. I wrote the majority of my first couple books on my phone on Google Docs, and they are not short books. The shortest one's 60,000-ish words. All the other ones are in the 90s, and the new one is like 105, and I'm kicking myself because it's a lot to edit. But it's, with auto-suggestion, it's not any slower to do it on the phone, strangely enough, and I was doing it while I was working my part-time job, so it kept me from wasting time at my job, and, it was just me kind of utilizing my time as effectively as possible. I'm sure they don't agree with that, but it worked. I still did my job. There's just a lot of downtime. And so, yeah, so that's what I do. Some people love things like Scrivener, but I'm not an outliner, and I write in order. So Scrivener is just a source of utter frustration for me, and so I just don't mess with it. So let's see. And Connor, I actually have the Artist's Way and the Artist's Way workbook, and strangely enough, I've never done it. It was recommended to me many, many years ago when I had a reading at the Body, Mind, Spirit Expo. She recommended that I do it, and I even got it, and I kind of read it and just never did it. It's very funny. And I'm actually using some of that story. That psychic is in a future book where I'm actually reincarnating Cam and Sharon and teaching people about reincarnation and just different things along the way. So it's kind of fun. But yes, I'm all about trying to sneak in my views of reality at least and just kind of plant seeds. It's never about like saying this is the answer, but planting seeds to a larger reality and see what people do with it. Jason, yes, I do Nano. So for those not familiar, NaNoWriMo is National Novel Writing Month, and that's in November. The point is the proper way to do Nano is to write start writing a novel, and it should be 50,000 words at the end of the month. I'm never at the beginning of a novel in November, so I'm just adding 50,000 words basically at that point. There's also Camp Nano, which is in April and June every year, and there you can set your own word goals. And so if it's too intense to try to do 50,000 words, especially if you've never done it, that's fine. Try Camp Nano and just kind of play with that word count. I use it just to reinforce the writing every day and try to stretch myself a little bit. I think it was this year I didn't win it, and it drove me a little crazy, but it was just where I was at on the books. And so it just is what it is. I wasn't going to force it because, again, intuition, listen to it. So, yeah, Nano can be, and there's a lot of good tips with the NaNoWriMo website, and so it's definitely worth looking at just to learn more about writing and kind of drafting. Where most people get bogged down is they try to edit as they write. Don't. So I only go back when my intuition says something is screwed up that impacts stuff going forward. Otherwise, keep writing, or you will never get to the end, and that's a huge waste of time. You will actually write faster by just going and then having to go back and make edits, more edits in theory, than if you try to do it as you go. It's a really good way to procrastinate, though. So, what's your goal? Do you actually want to get it written, or do you want to let yourself, kind of self-sabotage? So it's hard for people. Trust me, all the time. One thing that helps is to call it a zero draft instead of a first draft. So a zero draft is just getting the words on the paper. Figure out the story. Then go back and smooth it out. Then you could call that your first draft. But that first draft, when you call it a zero draft, it takes the pressure off it. At least that's how it works for me and some of my friends. So play with that. Okay. Gabe asked about collaborative writing or writing stories for role-playing games. I would say yes, if that works for you, go for it. For me, because everything impacts everything else, it's hard to do collaborative writing, but the book I'm editing right now was co-written with my friend, because I knew that there was no way for me to write the two. So it's a spin-off that came about because of a question she asked. And so that spin-off overlapped with the book I was writing, which meant both books had to be written at the same time, or I would regret it later and kick myself for some sort of plot hole or whatever, right? Some sort of issue that I would just hate myself for later. So I asked her, she's an aspiring writer anyway, to say, cool, why don't you co-write this with me? And the way we set that up is my character is an American Marine. Her character, she lives in England, right? So her character is an expat Londoner who lives in San Diego. And so it allowed us to write from our experiences and kind of, go off it from there. It was definitely challenging, though. Our styles don't always mesh the best, but it worked. Like, her weaknesses, I could fit with my strengths and vice versa. So I would say if you're open to collaboration, play with it, because that's brainstorming while you're writing, right? Which has got so much more potential. But it depends on how your brain works. So, and yeah, bye, Connor. Have fun. So let me see. I'm gonna go back here a little bit. So yeah. So let's see. And yeah, so I would say it can be beneficial to ask people how they do things, and at the same time recognize that it might not work for you, right? All of this stuff I said might be completely irrelevant for you. And if outlining works for you, cool, outline, go for it. And if this like fiction writing, like on a novel format, doesn't work for you, then that's okay too. And thanks, Jason, for coming in and sharing everything. So here's my morning. This is what happened today. Is I woke up after my awesome dream, and I know my dream was actually, and my brain's interpretation of me hanging out with the woman I referred to. We spend a lot of time together in various situations. So she is very much amused. Her fingerprint is all over my books. It's kind of ridiculous, but it makes me laugh anyway, because there are all these little things that other people wouldn't notice and that I don't even always notice. So this morning, I had this dream, and I was like, that was pretty cool. And then I took a little bit of time, and in the new book that I'm trying to write, one of the characters, so reincarnation version of Cam, is a guitarist, and she writes. And I'm like, man, I wish I could just write a song, because I need her to be able to write a song. But I can't, like, I sit down, I can't write a song. Partly, I don't know how. It's not my thing. If it happens, it's pure luck. So every time I go to write, it ends up being poetry. And I'm like, oh, well, I don't want it to be poetry, but it is what it is, right? And I wrote, actually, like, a poem today and part of a song. But it was partly me, but it was also the character writing it, right? So you can use poetry, in essence, as fiction by kind of separating yourself from it and creating a character and trying to see, like, what would this character be writing about? Does that make sense? It makes sense in my head. So that's basically what I've been trying to do with this new book. It's weird. I certainly couldn't have been able to do it before I wrote a few books, but yeah, so you can use the same principle in lots of different formats. Basically, I would say write, keep writing, play around with it, see what works. I think it'd be really cool if people, tried doing a collaborative kind of role play. I know there's one with this gathering, but a longer term group. And I think that was part of what that original group was doing 18 years ago, was this interactive role playing. It didn't make sense to me at the time, and it still probably wouldn't make sense for me to do it, but I can now understand the true value of that assignment. So get creative, play around with it, see what you can learn and do, and see what you learn in the process, see where your path goes due to it. And like I said, any questions at all, just reach out. And even if it's not for something Jedi related, just anything book related at all, just toss me an email and I'll gladly help you however I can. So if we have any last questions, otherwise I think that is, oh wait, it was because I was going to tell you the couple things I taught people in the books. All right. So in my first book, I taught people how to meditate by having Cam teach Laura how to meditate when they were on a hike. And so that was fun, and I kept it super simple, and so figure if anyone wanted to learn, now they could learn. And then the creative process for Cam and her grief. So what she realized, one of the things that kind of stuck her in her grief was because, with the exception of maybe her best friend Sarah, no one knew her whole story, her and Sharon's story, because the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy said that they had to stay hidden and in the closet. People couldn't know they were a couple. So only a few people knew that anyway, and they only knew parts of it. So when she realized that what really bothered her was that no one knew this amazing story, she sat down and started writing it. Not as a book, just as like a journal entry, just like memories as they came up. And she basically locked herself in her apartment for the weekend, got a self-care kit of a buttload of tissues and some Gatorade and food that would be easy and bland and just keep her sustained. And she just locked herself in her apartment and just wrote down as many memories, and the good and the bad, but mostly good, right? Wrote it all down so that it wasn't just stuck in her. And then she shared it with Sarah, which allowed it, again, not to be stuck inside her. And I think that with a lot of traumas, we internalize them and we keep them inside for good reasons. I mean, most people have not earned the trust to earn our trauma sharing, right? But even just getting them written down in a private journal means it's no longer just inside. You're getting it out there, and it allows more space for healing and growth. But it was funny because I hadn't ever put it all together like that until I was writing the book. Because for her, she was dealing with her fear of loss. Well, when you deal with a fear of anything, right, one approach is to do exposure therapy. Well, how do you expose yourself to the fear of losing someone dying again, right? Like, you can't. So for her, the only way was to kind of dive into that whole process and the pain, but also all the good stuff, and kind of just work through it at a deeper level. And so that was a really interesting experience, both for me to discover it and then to share it with people through this book. And then in the next book, there's an event that happens, which is actually when Cam and Sharon meet Sarah, who becomes their best friend very quickly, because they overhear some Marines threatening their safety. And then they hear someone being slammed up against the wall, and they're like, wait, that's a female talking right now? And so they go around to find that Sarah has one of the guys slammed up against a wall and is threatening them very effectively. And all the other guys are just like, you're crazy, and I'm not going near you. So in the moment, like, the situation was neutralized. But then afterwards, Cam kind of freaks out, because it's like, whoa, one, I don't know who these people are. Two, am I safe even walking around? I mean, this is on base. I should be safe, but now I don't feel safe. And so she's dealing with all this fear that's coming up. And I approached it in two different ways. So one, the character Sarah is experienced in fighting. Cam has some experience, but not much hands-on. And so Sarah teaches both Cam and Sharon some different practical self-defense stuff, and they like do a bunch of training so that they're empowered to address any situation. But the fear keeps lingering, and so Sarah ends up talking to her instructor while they're on leave, and she comes back and basically runs a guided meditation for Cam. And they run through different scenarios of what would happen if you ran into someone out in the dark and they say something or they try to do something, right? And they run so Sarah and Cam run through these different scenarios. And so basically teaching people different techniques to handle fear, and hopefully if someone is dealing with some fears, they could take that idea as inspiration and kind of run with it and run with their own scenarios. So those were just a couple of the ways that I kind of snuck in kind of training, in essence, into these books. So yeah, you never really know where you're going to end up when you're writing. And you'll learn some things, and other people will learn things if they read it, and basically it's just a really fascinating process, at least for me. So, any other questions? It's always weird when you can't see people's videos. All right, well, I think Allie is going to post the graphic up on there, so you'll have all my contact information that way. You can always find me at the Institute for Jedi Realist Studies, and really anywhere on the internet. I'm on Twitter as ButchJax. I'm on Facebook. So yeah, the email is usually the best way to get a hold of me. If not Twitter, it kind of depends. So. All right, well, thanks everyone for sharing your experiences as well and your questions. And if you think of any others, just reach out. Thanks.